Okay, so we were talking about the Federalist Papers yesterday and kind of honed in on number 10 for a while, which would take us to the next one, the Federalist number 51. Okay, highlights. Anyone? Federalist number 51.
Each department acts on its own interests and on its own to hold the other ones.
Okay, so when you're talking about departments, what are we talking about? Okay, 3 branches acting on their own?
On their own interests.
On their own interests, right? Okay. What do we call that? There's a couple common terms here, guys, that sometimes get confused. Okay, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it unless anybody can say it. What are we talking about? Each one acting on its own accord with its own powers. Yeah, they are independent of each other. Okay, for sure. What can they do to each other? What can one branch do to another branch? Check. Yes? Check. Okay, so there's 2 things that we generally talk about with the Constitution. So you have checks, right, and balances. But I think really, more importantly, in this Federalist paper, Madison is talking about I don't know. Is that bar right? Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah. Pretty sure.
Separation of powers. Okay, because what you just said, right, acting independently, separation of powers. Okay, so yes and yes. Okay, it's both of these. Okay, and they are vital to the Constitution. Okay, so only who can pass laws? Only which branch can pass laws? Legislative. Only which branch can enforce law? Okay, this isn't rocket science, people. Okay, executive, right? And then the judicial branch interprets the laws in the Constitution. Okay, so this is an important function. So one of the fears that Patrick Henry had and the Anti-Federalists had was that the executive, the president, would become like a king. He can't because of this. Okay, no one branch can become too powerful because of this and this, because they have specific powers granted to them. Okay, let me just give you an example. Okay, so the Supreme Court can rule laws unconstitutional. We all know that. But they can also declare actions of the executive, the president, unconstitutional. We see this all the time right now with President Trump. President Trump is trying to send the National Guard to states like Portland, Oregon. Okay, and you got a federal judge somewhere that says, you can't do that. Now, eventually the Supreme Court will rule that he can, but you have these activist judges that come in and try and get in the way because they're activists. Okay? So, you guys all remember the Trail of Tears? Pushing the Native Americans out of Georgia, actually Cherokee Indians out of Georgia, pushing them west, right? Andrew Jackson was the president of the United States. And he was the one that was doing it. And the Supreme Court told Andrew Jackson, stop. You can't do this. You know what Andrew Jackson says to the Supreme Court? He said, well, you guys come down here and stop me. how does the judicial branch stop the executive branch? The executive branch, right, has the sword. The judicial branch has no sword. So, what would have been the proper way to stop President Jackson from carrying out the Trail of Tears? This body over here could have done what to President Jackson? Impeached. But they didn't. Why did the legislative branch not impeach Andrew Jackson over pushing the Indians west? Native Americans apologize. Because they agreed with it. You understand? Okay. So if there's agreement among the three branches, you're not going to get as many checks. Okay. So 99% of the time, if the judicial branch tells the executive branch they can't do something, 99.9% of the time, they listen. And when they pass a law, and the judicial branch says that's unconstitutional, who enforces the law that the legislature passed? The executive. The executive won't enforce it because it's unconstitutional. Okay. So Madison is explaining to people, listen, guys, don't worry. This government's not going to become too powerful. With these separation of powers and checks and balances, it'll be okay. And guys, I think after 250 years, he's right. It's worked pretty good. Okay. All right. So that takes us to number 54. Okay. Not sure how many of you guys read the entire text of this, but this is Madison again, right? And it's kind of a sad one, because he's talking, in essence, he's trying to explain what to the people of New York. He's explaining this compromise, right, on 3/5 with the slaves, okay, and what that means. And it's just kind of a sad thing to read when you're talking about divesting people of their humanity, okay, and that's exactly what he says at the end, okay. So the last paragraph of Federalist number 54 says, let the case of the slaves be considered as it is in truth a peculiar one. Let the compromising expedient of the Constitution, okay, be mutually adopted. We need to adopt this new Constitution, which regards them as inhabitants, but as debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave as divested of 2/5 of a man. So subtracting 2/5 from 5/5, you get 3/5. Okay. And so that will be the formula used to count population as it pertains to representation in the House of Representatives and to taxes. So the southern states will have to pay more in taxes because of the slaves. Okay, but they will have more power than maybe they should have in the House of Representatives. Okay. All right, and that takes us to the last one, which is Federalist number 78 by Alexander Hamilton. Okay. I think this is a very poignant sentence in the first paragraph. So if you look at it and you drop down 6 lines, and it says, the judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of society. It can take no active resolution whatever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment. and must ultimately depend on the aid of the executive arm for its efficacy of its judgments. Like I just explained, when the Supreme Court declares an action of the executive or a law of the legislature invalid, unconstitutional, this process is called judicial review. Okay, so let me explain something to you here. In this document, the Constitution, it does not give the power of judicial review to the Supreme Court. It does not exist in the original Constitution. I know you guys learned this last year. I'm going to review it with you, okay? This principle of being able to declare, okay, laws of the legislature and actions of the executive, president, the ability to declare these unconstitutional is an implied power. It's not expressed in the Constitution. So as we move along, guys, we're going to learn about inherent powers, implied powers, express powers, concurrent powers, and reserved powers. These are different powers laid out in the Constitution. An express power would be this: only Congress can declare war. That's it says it in there. The power to do these things is not expressed. It's implied. So, the first Supreme Court, does anybody remember who the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court was? His name's in here. He's one of the three. John Jay becomes the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He quits. They put the first Supreme Court, guys, in the unfinished basement of the U.S. Capitol. They didn't even have their own building. They had no power, and that's what Hamilton's talking about in this essay. They got no power, really, and they're the weakest of the three branches. And so there's a court case in 1803, and they're going to use this paper, Federalist number 78, as reasoning to grant judicial review. Does anybody know the name of this court case in 1803? You've all heard it before. Versus Madison. Okay, this case in 1803 establishes judicial review using Federalist number 78 to explain this implied power that is not expressed in the Constitution. Does that make sense to you? Okay, this again reaffirms how important the Federalist Papers are, because they explain the Constitution. Okay? And today, the Supreme Court can judge these other branches and do it all the time. Okay? So the Supreme Court this term, I think I told you this, has 25 cases that they're taking. I told you about that with the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. That's one of the cases. All of these cases generally deal with laws or actions of the executive. Okay, whether those laws are valid or invalid. Okay, and so, or the Constitution itself, right? So, how do we read the 14th Amendment? They're going to try and figure that out. What do they mean by that? Okay, so this is good. So we got 85 essays published in newspapers in New York. Does it work? we need 9 states to ratify. Yes? So let me pull back up the notes here that I was showing you. So what are the big issues here, right? Remember, what are the big issues? The small states are worried that they're going to be dominated by the populated states. The other big concern is the national government's going to be too powerful. Okay, so you need 9 states to ratify. The first state to ratify is going to be Delaware. Okay, you don't really have to write all this down, but Delaware is the first state. It's the smallest state. There's only 59,000 people living in Delaware. There's almost 700,000 in Virginia. Okay, I don't know if you guys have you ever look at your coins, your quarters. About, I don't know, 15 years ago, they started minting quarters with the states on the back. Okay, so they did this in the order that they became states. So Hawaii was the last quarter minted. Delaware was the first quarter minted because it was the first state to ratify the Constitution on December 17th, 1787. Okay, so that tells you that the Senate, in the Great Compromise, the Senate, where Delaware has 2 senators, and so does Virginia, Delaware liked this. They're like, okay, we're on board. Okay. Now, these 2 are deeply divided. Virginia and New York, you got to have these 2. They need to be 2 of the 9. And whatever Virginia does, generally North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia are going to do. Okay. So you need Virginia. Well, you got Patrick Henry, who's really opposed to this, but you've got George Washington from Virginia. You got Thomas Jefferson from Virginia. And let me tell you, those guys, they carry a lot of weight. So they're going to throw their support behind this new Constitution, and Virginia will vote for the new Constitution. Federalist Papers written by these 3 men, and you should know these names for the test, okay? Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, who write these Federalist Papers, will convince the people of New York. So you got the 2 big ones, okay? New Hampshire, live free or die. New Hampshire will be the 9th state on June 21st, 1788. So guys, this doesn't happen overnight. They agreed to this Constitution in September of 87. Okay, so it takes about 9 months for the Constitution to be ratified. So it doesn't happen overnight. Now, some of the states, like Massachusetts, Virginia, and this is important. Okay, you writing all this down, and I'll leave that on there. I had to show up for school yesterday. You got another appointment today or what?
Today.
You've had some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what was one of the big sticklers with the Anti-Federalists? That the Constitution did not include what? Bill of Rights. Okay. So some of the states are going to say, we will not ratify without a Bill of Rights. Okay, and I'll give you a little twist here on history, okay? I'm not going to ask you which state was first and ninth, okay, on the test. Okay, so remember, Publius is the pen name, and then here, okay, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Virginia said, we will ratify if you put in a Bill of Rights. Okay? So let's talk about what these men, some of these men become. Okay, Jefferson stays in France. He is, he's going to become the first secretary of what? Under this new government, Jefferson. State. Hamilton's going to become the first secretary of what? Treasury. John Jay will become the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. George Washington will be elected unanimously the first president of the United States under the new Constitution. Wonder what little James Madison becomes. The father of the Constitution. He's a Virginian. Hancock will go be governor of Massachusetts. Sam Adams will serve in the Massachusetts legislature. But little James Madison is going to become the first Speaker of the House of Representatives. So the first Congress will meet in New York on March 4th, 1789. And the leader of the House of Representatives will be James Madison. Okay? So, as somebody that is in Congress, okay, so the House of Representatives, the first House, we know how many we have today in the House, right? How many members are there in the United States House of Representatives? Okay, the first House is going to have 65. Okay, based on population. So Virginia is going to have the most seats. Okay, the Senate is going to be 26, 2 from each of the 13. So the person in charge of the House, the Speaker, this position is created. Today, that guy's name is Mike Johnson. Okay, from Louisiana. Right? Madison will author, in part, the Bill of Rights that he opposed being in the Constitution. That's a little twist in history because he was a Federalist, and the Federalists said, we don't need a Bill of Rights. And then these states demanded it. Thank God, right? Thank God they demanded it. And so now we have it, and Madison helped write it, the Bill of Rights. And what better guy would you want to write the Bill of Rights than somebody like James Madison? Okay, so that's good. Okay, so they thought about the First Amendment a lot, free speech. They added freedom of the press to the First Amendment. Why did they do that? Remember when we went back and we did the roots of our rights from the English constitutions, from the Magna Carta, the Petition Right, the English Bill of Rights? Freedom of the press wasn't in there. You know why we put it in there? Because under state constitutions, newspapers were being critical in some of the states of their governors, and they were being thrown in jail, being critical of their governor, criticizing the politicians. So that experience, they said, oh, yeah, you can't be putting people in jail for criticizing the government. Okay, and then they said the same thing with speech and religion. So, like I said, in some of the states, you had to be a certain religion to serve in government. And they're like, oh, no, we got to fix that. So they said, you have free exercise. There's no established religion. So this history, guys, that we've just kind of all put together, dating back to 1215 in the Magna Carta, now we've got our Constitution. Now we've got our Bill of Rights. Okay? So it's all come together, and George Washington is going to lead the country. And now we're going to be off to a better start. Okay? And Washington will stay for 2 terms. There's no term limits. Washington could have stayed until he died. But he gave up that seat, and James Madison becomes our first vice president and our second president. John Adams. Did I say John Adams? John Adams becomes our first vice president and our second president. Okay. All right. So, the next thing I have is we need to do an overview of the basics of the Constitution. Okay? There are 7 articles in the Constitution. Okay? We'll break these down. So let me just kind of tell you what we got left here. I got to talk about the first 3 articles are 3 branches. We're going to do separate units on each of those. So we're not going to go into great detail. So we'll really study the Article 4, 5, 6, and 7. And 4 is the most detailed. And then we're going to study the Bill of Rights and the amendments, all 27 amendments. Okay, so we'll be doing that next week. And then we're going to talk about federalism, that relationship between national government, state government, and local government. Okay, federalism. Okay, and then we're going to be done. So I'm going to be gone next Thursday and Friday, which is probably around the time of the test. Okay, so I'll figure all that out. Okay, but we still got quite a bit to cover here. Okay, and this test is going to be a lot. It's a hard one. Okay, from there it gets easier. I did finish all my history tests, so I did take the essays home last night. Nothing happened when they got there. Okay, but this weekend, my goal is to grade all the essays and have them in the book by Monday morning. Okay, that's my goal. I do have quite a bit on the plate this weekend, but Sunday looks pretty open. Okay, all right, all right. Basics of the Constitution. Okay. We have 7 articles. Okay. Article 1, legislative branch. Article 2, executive branch. Article 3, 2. Geez, I'm just, yeah. Good morning. Okay. So we're going to jump into Article 4 of the Constitution. Okay. All right, we've got what you would refer to in here, what they discuss. Right here it says interstate and federal relations. Okay, so what does this mean? This means in between states. How do the states, how do their relations work? And then how do relations between the states and the federal government work? That's what we're talking about here, okay? So there's several clauses in Article 4. First one we're going to talk about is the full faith and credit. Everybody in here have a driver's license? Everybody's got a driver's license? Nathan, you got a driver's license? Not yet? You get a driver's license. Okay? All right. Have any of you guys ever driven outside the state of Kansas? Driven out of there? Okay. Okay. What allows you to drive in Colorado or Oklahoma or Nebraska with a Kansas driver's license? This does. So, official documents of one state must be recognized by the other states. You must give full faith and credit to the official documents of other states. So, I was married in one of the most corrupt state capitals of the 50 state capitals, which would be Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A lot of corruption down there. But my marriage license is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Kansas has to recognize my marriage license, even though it's from Louisiana. Okay? Contracts, official documents, must be recognized by other states. Okay? Now let me just throw a little twist in here about how our system works and kind of clarifies how our system functions. I talked about this in the first week of class when we talked about gay marriage. Okay? The first state to allow gay marriage was Massachusetts. Okay? Very liberal state. And the fear was that if a couple got married, a same-sex couple got married in Massachusetts, and they decided to move to Alabama, where they don't have gay marriage at the time. Okay? Well, under the full faith and credit clause, Alabama or Kansas would have to recognize that gay marriage from Massachusetts. So Congress passed a law called the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA. What this says is that Alabama or Kansas does not have to recognize a same-sex marriage from another state. Okay, so tell me something. What can you tell me about this law, the Defense of Marriage Act? Does it violate the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution? Duh, yes, it does. Did Congress know it violated the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution when they passed it? Yes, they did. But they passed it anyway. Because people were like, whoa, whoa, no, no, no. We're not for gay marriage. Okay? So they passed it. Now, whose job is it to declare this unconstitutional? Come on. Come on. Okay, or the Supreme Court. Okay? It took 13 years for them to do that. Here's the thing about the Supreme Court, guys. They're not going to rule on things they don't think the American people are ready for them to rule on. If it's going to upset the apple cart too much, they're just going to not take that case. See, the Supreme Court only hears cases it wants to hear. There's 9 justices on the Supreme Court. If 5 of them want to hear a case, I think it's 4. If 4 of them want to hear a case, they'll take the case. So they're like, listen, if we strike down this law, we're gonna have a problem on our hands. Okay? In fact, what might have happened is there might have been a push to pass a constitutional amendment defining marriage as one man, one woman. Okay? But by the time Massachusetts started this, Hawaii was close behind. Okay? So it took until 2017 to where the Supreme Court just granted that gay marriage was allowed in all 50 states. Okay? And I'll remind you guys, in 2008, when Barack Obama was running for president, so was Hillary Clinton. Both of them were opposed to gay marriage. As late as 2008. Okay? My, how times have changed. Okay? So, that's just a kind of an interesting way of looking at how our system functions. Is that okay? So, death certificates, contracts, driver's licenses, and so forth. Full faith and credit laws. Okay? That really deals with our relations between the states. Anything to add on that? Okay. I think that's good for today. So we'll keep working in the Article 4 on Monday. Have a great weekend. Like and subscribe.